Hey, everybody, and welcome to Skagit County Track and Field Podcast, episode 15. We are on the Sprinters Roundtable. We are going to talk about all things sprints and hurdles and relays. As with our other roundtable, we have a distinguished county legend with us today, Mr. Dave Salkeld. He has been coaching in the county and then took a small hiatus, left down to District 4, coached there for a while, and then came back. And we are so incredibly happy to have him part of our personal program, but also on the podcast today. So, Coach Salkeld, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
So we're going to start this off, Coach Salkeld, and we want you to give us a little bit of your background, being a county legend and all. Can you give us your quick 30-second history as an athlete, kind of where you grew up, and then move into your coaching career to where you're at now?
Yes, well, I grew up in a small town in District 4, a little place called PL, where we were so small, I was a four-sport athlete. All right, so track was my favorite love, but thanks to my mother, who was 4'10", I was not real gifted. I was one of these guys who could run. Well, we ran in yards, we ran in cinder, or on a football field, whatever we had. So, but I had a good time. I enjoyed baseball. Football was great. Lost my cartilage in my left leg, broken nose, and a broken finger. So I was a successful high school athlete. Because of my size, I didn't compete at the collegiate level. Came up to Western, taught there, or went to school there. Then student taught in Cedar Woolley. They hired me foolishly. And at the middle school at that point, I taught there for several years. They needed a track coach, so I volunteered since I love track, just love track. And then the high school opened up in the late 70s. I started coaching there. And that kind of summarizes where I was. Except for hiatus, I went to Seaholm and then for a couple of years and worked with Coach Ted Flint up there, who was one of my former athletes. And then went to Tucson when I retired, came back and coached in PL for a couple of years because I had a little farm down there. And then when my wife became ill, we came back up to Skagit County here. And that's where I've been ever since.
Awesome. Well, again, I can't tell you much, or I can't tell you how much we appreciate you being on staff and being on here today. Coach Salkeld's bread and butter is the hurdles, so we're gonna lean on him and Coach Wallace here pretty heavily when we get to that part of our talk. But Jake, do you kind of want to take it away, and we'll dive into our first little segment here on the sprints?
Yeah, so we're going to kind of break this up where we're looking at sprints, hurdles, and relays, but I think we'll talk sprint program to start out with. So we're fortunate to have a couple of head coaches as well as some assistant coaches that kind of play those roles. So I'm going to start kind of just to ask what your sprint philosophy is for your program, and then if you can kind of give us what does that look like on a weekly basis? I think that's kind of, to me, what would be most helpful to kind of understand, like, how you approach your workouts in terms of the philosophy. And then, what does that look like logistically in terms of what we're doing? And I'll start with Brad, if you're good with that, and kind of how that looks like for Anacortes. So.
Sure. And this will be pretty brief. I don't think my Gretchen, my sprints coach, was able to make it tonight. Gretchen has full autonomy with our sprinters, and she does a great job. She gets a lot of her philosophy. We went to a clinic one time, and there was a presenter from, was it one of the Spokane schools? I can't remember which, East Valley, West Valley, that she got a lot from. She bases a lot of her philosophy on that. She works a lot with the biomechanics. A good portion of our practice is taken up with that. And then she works it's actually kind of, from an outsider's perspective, watching them what they're doing in practice, it almost seems like it's the opposite of feed the cats a little bit sometimes. Not we don't. I mean, we get our max speed in, but we do a lot of speed endurance type stuff. Or have in the past. Gretchen's looking at kind of revamping the way we do things this year, which is kind of why we've been questioning you a little bit about what your program is and what the feed the cats is like, and how you felt that's been successful or not. But yeah, one day I think after our biomechanics, she dedicates one day to speed development, whether that's going to be max velocity or acceleration, and then a couple of days a week to speed endurance. So that's as much as I can address on that, I think.
And Brad, I got two follow-ups real quick. So one is
okay.
what's the approach for league meets, so non-invitationals for your sprinters? And then the second thing is, are you able to get weight room integrated, and if so, what does that look like? So kind of first thing, how do you approach league meets? And then second, is there weight room components added into that?
Sure. League meets, I know I've talked to some coaches, or I've heard some coaches say they kind of look, kind of train through league meets, and it's sometimes more of a training modality than anything else. We kind of take the opposite of approach. When there's competition and a starting gun involved, we're trying to do our best to compete. Maybe not in the same event every week, but it's definitely about competition, about scoring team points, especially on the girls' side. The last couple of years we had, up until this last year, we had a 6-year unbeaten streak in dual meets on the girls' team until Oak Harbor took us out. So that was a really heavy focus for us, and probably will be going forward. Weight room, we have a real good athletic director, and always had and do now, about being able to schedule equity in the weight room. During track, we're in there now, obviously, but during track season, we usually get up in the weight room, the sprinters and distance runners and throwers, we kind of rotate in and out all week long after practice. So distance isn't up there too much unless it's a maintenance workout. We're heavily involved with plyos at that time, but the sprinters and the throwers are up there lifting probably twice a week, I think. At least they try to after practice.
Okay, awesome. Appreciate it.
Yep.
And I'll shoot to Wooly on this one, because we got 3 coaches from Burlington, so I think we'll kind of wrap the sprint part up with them. So Johnny, and then Dave, you want to intersect at any point in time with that? But in terms of our sprint philosophy and kind of what that looks like on a weekly basis.
Yeah. And this is why I love this podcast, is because, I think Brad's had, and Anna Cordes and Gretchen, they do a great job with the sprints. And for us, our philosophy is probably the exact opposite. And I mean, it just proves that there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat. For us, and I got most of this line of thinking from Boo Schexnader, and some Tony Holler stuff put in there too. But for us, we're going to run at high intensities with max power output or max velocity work. We're going to have long rest intervals in between, so that way they're fully recovered. And usually for us, it's somewhere about 1 minute per 10 meters sprinted. So if we're running 30s, we'd run our 30, and then they'd have at least 3 minutes rest in between each of those reps. And then I guess the last part, other than high intensities and long rest intervals, is like manageable volumes. So everything we do is under 6 seconds. And the total volume for the day, if we're working acceleration, is somewhere around 300 meters total for the workout. And if we're working max velocity, it's a little bit longer than that, somewhere around 400 meters total. So for us, an entire workout might be 300 meters broken down into certain segments. For a typical week, we'll do a speed day, or what I like to call it's more neural than it is anything. We're trying to tap into that neural adaptation on our speed days. So like the first week of practice, we'll do a neural day on Monday, and then Tuesday's a technique day. And for us, there might be some sprinting on technique days, like if we're going over wickets or things like that, but mostly it's resisted sprints, It's relay handoffs, it's field event work, and slowing stuff down. So technique day would be on Tuesday. We'd go back to a neural day on Wednesday, another technique day on Thursday, and then Friday of week 1, we have a lactate workout. And so for that, we are going to run a 150. We're going to wait 2 minutes, walk back to the start, run another 150, wait 2 minutes, and then run our last 150. And that's all they'll do for that day. We'll add those 3 times together, and that will give us an approximation of maybe what they can run the 400 in. But that would be an example of a lactate workout for us, and that's anything over 6 seconds or 60 meters.
Okay, and then the same thing in terms of league meet philosophy and weight room. What is that?
Yeah, so for us, if you look at the way we train, you're going to say, well, where do you get your specific endurance at? And my answer to that is, well, the first couple weeks when we don't have meets, we'll have a designated lactate day. But other than that, like once meets start rolling around, those are our specific endurance days. So we use league meets totally as a training purpose. We still want to compete. We still might not put everybody in all of their events, but we're going to ask them to run something long. So like if you're a 100, 200 meter person, then we'll put you on like a B or a C or even a D team 4x4 relay. So that way you can get your specific endurance in. And for us, it makes practices more enjoyable when you're not doing that type of work at practice. And we tend to stay pretty healthy that way. And I think the best day to get speed endurance done is at meets under competitive, environments. I've always had a hard time asking kids to run a certain workout at a certain tempo or a certain percentage. I just think it's hard for them. And so, we run everything at full speed, and we'll use those league meets to get some volume under our belt before we get to the latter parts of the season.
Yeah. And then Burlington, and Kevin, you can default to this, or you can kind of steer the conversation. But I know we have Sue and Ryan here, so kind of how same thing. Kind of how does what's Burlington's philosophy, and then kind of how does that look for a week?
Well, our philosophy, we work very collaboratively. Sue, Ryan, and I talking about what our workouts are going to be, and a lot of times we'll kind of have an idea of what the workout's going to be. I know Sue and I a lot of times have changed it that day. Just we kind of a lot of it is kind of a feel of where your kids are. I know especially later in the season, if your kids are beat up or we're feeling like they're just not running as sharp, we might tweak a workout and make it a little bit more of a specific, like try to make it a faster workout rather than a long one. We definitely train our kids for the 400. Our top sprinters, the majority of them, especially the first part of the season, I would say before spring break, we definitely have them running at more of a 400 training, just because we feel like it leaves us options for later in the season. And then we'll, our shorter kids, our primary, just our vaulters or our jumpers, they'll be doing the shorter sprint stuff, but definitely a little on the longer side early season, kind of the way we do it. And I would say our philosophy is very similar to you guys as far as how we treat the regular season meets. Sue, do you have anything to add on that?
Not really. Mondays are generally our heavy workout days, and we kind of split our kids into 2 groups, as Kevin said, the long sprinters and the short sprinters. And then we have a Tuesday would be more of an event work day, jumping or relay handoffs. And we try to have like 2 decent workouts a week. So Wednesday or Thursday would be the other kind of heavy workout day for the sprinters.
And then Stu or Kevin, in terms of when you're kind of saying heavy in terms of volume, what does your volume look like progression wise in terms of beginning, middle, end? If you can kind of touch base on that.
Go ahead, Kevin. You want to?
It's kind of, it's really, it's gone back and forth so many times over our career as far as how long is long. I mean, at one point, I remember we would train our 400 runners at the beginning of the season. We'd run 500s, 400. They'd run, almost 1,600 meters worth of intervals. As time's gone on, we've tried to go maybe at I would say we go up in the 1,200 range. I would say early on, 12 to 1,400 meters even. And it's
100 for long sprinters, 1,200, but for the short sprinters, 900
that.
maybe.
Yeah.
So here's a question, Kevin and Sue and Brad as well. Do you guys separate like your 1-2 group from your 2-4 group, or does everybody train the same, or are there days where they might split up?
Totally separate. And of course, when I'm planning the sprinter workouts, I'll separate just 400 runners, and then we'll have a 100, 200 group. But Gretchen, pretty much when she's training, I think she has, for the most part, everyone together in the workouts, except for when they're doing some 400 race specific stuff. Then she'll take that 3 or 4 and they'll do their thing. We go totally separate. We have the long group and the short group. And sometimes as we kind of see as time goes on, there'll be kids that maybe are fastest kids that they can't handle the longer. And our long sprint now is probably a 300, where, like I said, it used to be we'd go in the 500s even, but that's a kind of an old school training philosophy. And we're talking about very early season. We're definitely going more 200s, 150s. The short, even for the long groups, they might do more of them, but it's absolutely full recovery on that. I mean, we're not running a 200 and then 30 seconds go another 200. But we might go later in the season. One of our favorite workouts is broken 400s, where you put a 400 into pieces and you'll run like the first 100 meters of it, 30-second rest, the next 150 of it, 30-second rest, and really and do it once. But it's a really good kind of show what you can do with a little bit of rest in there, but kind of tax their nervous system a little bit as a tune up toward the end of the season.
Yeah, that broken 400. My brother Chad, he was my sprint coach when I was in high school, and he talked a lot to some guys that were doing some Clyde Hart work. And my favorite 400 workout for me as a competitor was you would run a 200, practicing the first 200 of your 4. So you'd get out quick and then you'd float that back stretch, and then you'd walk back 100, and then you'd run the back stretch in the corner, and then you'd walk back 100, and then you'd attack the corner and the home stretch. And you could, it was a great lactate workout, but it also allowed you to practice the different sections of the race. And I loved that. I thought that was great.
Yeah, I think it's really good for that.
So my final thing since we have Burlington and Anna course here, what is tempo, and if you use it, what does tempo look like in your sprint programs currently? Because for us, philosophically, we've shifted away from that, and a lot of it was we're going to hit this at 60, or we're going to hit this at 70 or 80 percent of your your 1 or your 2 or whatever. Do you still utilize that metric, or do you do something different in terms of that? Because I'm hearing a lot of different variations of speed endurance, but I kind of want to tap more into specifically what is tempo. If you use it, what does it look like?
I think we found kids have kind of a hard time with gauging, what a 70% effort or whatever percent effort is. So we tend to give them a target range that we want them to hit on whatever the length of interval we're doing. So, and that obviously changes during the season, what their target range is going to be. But running by feel isn't the easiest thing for a high school athlete to do, percentage wise.
So Sue, do you give them like a goal time range for them to finish whatever rep they're in under?
Yeah, we give
Yeah.
them a goal range. Yeah.
And we'll do subgroups too. Like
Yeah.
with the three of us, it's kind of nice. And Ryan, a lot of times early in the season, he'll have his hurdlers doing the same thing we do with no hurdles. As we get further into the season, he'll take the hurdlers and do that. He'll do a similar variation to what we're doing, but over hurdles. And then Sue and I will take the groups. And sometimes it'll be, we'll have an A group and a B group of the long sprinters and an A group and a B group of the short sprinters. And that way we can really make sure, the bigger the group, obviously you've got kids that are going to not be able to hang with the top kids. So we usually will take like our top kids and they will train together. So you might have a group of like 6 girls that are going to be like our main relay pool. And those girls will train together and it really helps push each other. And the same with the boys. And then there might be a subgroup that just really they can run one time, maybe what those other kids can. A lot of times they're younger kids, but they get running with a group of kids that they are equal to as far as pace. It really helps them to keep up with kids that they can run with, rather than getting discouraged and getting, coming in last every single interval. It works a lot better that way.
Yeah, I remember when Davis Mihalik, his senior year, that's kind of how we did stuff when we were doing tempo work and some longer volume workouts. I think, Kevin, we would separate them and give them color groups. So like red group, your time for this rep needs to be at a 102 or less. Green group, your goal is 132 or less, and we did it that way and it tended to work out good. But we would subgroup them into sometimes like 5 different groups just because we're so, polar on our talent and speed.
All right. So the last thing I'll say too is, and just kind of add on in terms of Cedro's sprint program, one thing we shifted to that feeds into kind of Tony Holler and Boo, and everything's measurable when we're sprinting, and so like we're timing constantly, and that feedback with the system that we use that collects that information, I think that's been kind of our driving force for a lot of our sprint philosophy, and then kind of using those measurements to say, hey, this is, and I think that was the big shift from us from running the 60 to 70% output of what your max should be, and kind of dividing those groups up and kind of how that all works. And again, that's not a critique on kind of how that works. I've used that for years and had a lot of success. And obviously you guys have had a lot of success with that, but that I just wanted to kind of hit that point in terms of, how we've shifted, our philosophy in terms of what that is and kind of how that time measurement based on other things is kind of moving us forward with our sprint philosophy in terms of that. So I kind of wanted to add that last point on there, Johnny, if that's good. And then I think we'll shift into hurdles if that's good. And I was going to kind of start with getting based on sprint program, and how your coaches have established those, head coaches have worked with you to establish those sprint programs. Technique wise with the hurdles, if Dave and Ryan, you could, and I'll start with Dave, but like, how do you approach hurdle technique based on our model of practice plan and our training plan. So how has that sort of either shifted or adapted? How do you attack that with trying to really provide technique training, but also being conscious of volume for our athletes? So I'll start with Dave, and then we'll kind of go with Ryan.
Okay, well, we do, all the hurdlers are sprinters, so they do the total workout with you and Johnny as sprinters. And we go through all our warm-up stuff as all hurdlers do. And then we focus on short, really intense work over the hurdles. We don't do a lot of volume. We rarely run over more than 3 hurdles, and everything, I stress, should be high intensity, and rapid turnover. So we constantly focus on speed because that's the name of the game. As I told, I always tell my hurdlers that, hurdlers are just really excellent sprinters with guts. And that's it. That's really all I focus on is short, intense, and work on being as good as we can be in form. That's my whole philosophy, basically.
And then Dave, for us, how many days a week are you going over hurdles with our kind of workout plan initiated?
Well, we go over the majority of the weeks, we go over them twice a week because Mondays, we really don't do them. They're focused on Johnny's and your sprint program. Tuesdays, they go through a sprint warm-up, and then we go over to the hurdles. We do our wall drills over hurdle drills, and then we get actually over to the hurdles, set up the blocks, and focus on our attacking the hurdles, speed, intensity, just the stuff that Ryan shakes his head about. He says, yeah, that's what we do too. And then Wednesday, again, we usually don't go over them. Sometimes I try to drag them over and at least get them through the wall drills and maybe through some over hurdle stuff. But only 2 days a week do we really focus on getting serious on the hurdles.
And then kind of last question for you, and this may believe the very last question, but what is sort of the reps? What's the number of reps you have in your head, or the thing that you look for when you're seeing an athlete kind of do those short repetition, high intensity? What is your, this is how many I want you to do, or this is when I want you to, I want to cut you off?
Okay, well, that's a good question. Hurdlers want to hurdle forever, and they just want to keep going and going, and they don't want to rest. So I am infamous for my telling them stories, and they after their freshman year, they understand there's a reason I'm telling them all my stories is to give them that rest period. We don't do a lot. I say, all right, today we're going to go 3 times over 3 hurdles or 4 times over 3 hurdles with a full rest in between. I discount them, both distance and height. And I stress the quick rhythm. Work on front side mechanics, and of course the importance of the trail leg. So it's just a technique and speed thing we do, and it's got to be low volume. The kids just want to keep going, but the only thing we do is hurt them if we do that.
Great, thanks. Ryan, can you kind of approach that from the same perspective? So your program's sprint philosophy, how do you build that into your hurdle? And we talked a little bit on a previous podcast, but still kind of touching on those points.
Yeah, for sure. So, kind of along the lines of what Kevin said earlier, we divide our season. We kind of look at pre-spring break, post-spring break. And so I look at my hurdlers as, do I have just high hurdle specific hurdlers, 300 specific, or do I have, the dual threat? And so that kind of changes things. Those kids will always train to be 300 hurdlers. So we decided a number of years ago that our 300 hurdlers, prior to spring break, they will train with the long sprint group, with the 400 runners. They need that base. They need that foundation, especially on our interval workout days, which I think Sue mentioned were typically are Mondays, sometimes Tuesdays, depending on our week. But the high hurdlers, they'll tend to be with the short group, but the high hurdlers actually get a chance to hurdle early. I'll get them over hurdles maybe, as we get closer to our first meet that third week. But Mondays are our workout days typically. And so high hurdlers, I'll have some type of high hurdle workout for them, keeping it, the number of reps. I think I'd mentioned in that earlier podcast that the number of hurdles they go over matters. You can really run them into the ground, shin splints, other overuse type of injuries. And so really limiting the number of reps that they do, so that those first couple weeks, I would say we don't go over more than 5 at a time. And we're always one height lower. So high hurdlers will be hurdling at 300 hurdle height. That allows that quickness that Dave talked about, that kind of that attack mentality. 3 inches doesn't matter, in the grand scheme of things. But that really does help them with that focus factor and they're usually, and the other big thing that I decided years ago, they're not in spikes until the day before a meet. Because I think back to the days I ran on cinder, and the beating you take in spikes and hurdles, it takes a toll. And so we're in running shoes until the day before a meet. So that's kind of that first third of the season. When we come back from spring break, some kids, it's almost a restart. They might have taken that week off. And so my endurance type workouts, my long kind of heavy hitter type workouts tend to hit in that second, third week of April, get them back into shape. And I think that's, we do that with our sprinters too, as we look ahead to kind of that third phase, which is May postseason. But really the reps is a big thing. Post spring break, that's when I get to take the 300 hurdlers with me specifically. And kind of like what we mentioned with that broken 400, I tend to do that the 300 hurdlers. We tend to focus on no more than, Kevin, Sue, and I, we talk in terms of, hey, what are the long sprinters doing today? How many meters? And then I'll take that same distance and then I break the phases up. The 300 hurdles, you can work the first 100, second 100, third 100, anything in between. But again, minimizing the reps. Sometimes it's half the workouts over hurdles, half the workouts open sprint. And so just trying to take care of these kids, because a lot of our hurdlers are also vaulters, jumpers. So we try to take care of them.
So I've got a pretty specific question for both you hurdle guys. And because Dave's the county legend, I'm going to ask him first, and then Ryan, you can't copy his answer. Okay.
Okay, sure.
So this is a little bit more rapid fire. Dave, you talked about earlier, you talked about hurdlers are nothing more than great sprinters with guts. And I 100% agree with you. I was scared as shit of the hurdles. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. Mentally, what is the mentality, I guess, is a better way of asking it, that a hurdler must have if they're going to be a good or an elite sprinter at the high school level? They have to have something, some sort of mental makeup. What would you say is the biggest attribute mentally that a good hurdler has to have?
Besides a lack of fear, just a desire to be very successful and willing to put in the work to do it. I think that's what separates a lot of hurdlers from sprinters, besides the fear factor, is that it's very technical. It's by far the most technical running event. And those kids are willing to put in the time to try to perfect the skills it takes to be successful.
Okay, Ryan, same question to you.
It'll probably be synonymous, but I'll use different words.
Semantics, Ryan, semantics.
Exactly, semantics. Yeah. Grit is a big one. Tenacity. One of those things that is the intangibles as what I look for in a hurdler. Sometimes it's just one of those things that I may not know a kid wants to hurdle until maybe I have to nudge them. But sometimes we get eyes on them, and we do certain things in our early practices. We call it the Tiger Triathlon. We do an inter squad meet. Sometimes we get those diamonds in the rough, but like Dave said, hurdlers, they have to buy in, and they have to realize that, much like, I would say pole vaults in this category, you could say almost any of the field events but the technique events with hurdling and pole vault, you're not going to get necessarily immediate success. So looking for kids that are willing to hang after when practice might be over, wanting to work a little bit extra, and kind of putting in that time to be better. That's one of those things that we've all had athletes that have the heart and not the talent, or vice versa. And if you can get the combo, then that's great. But hurdlers, they have to have that attitude. They have to be willing to just go for it. And good sprinters will make great hurdlers if they put in the time for it.
Yeah.
Okay, and then follow up to that, and this is kind of where we'll leave it for now. Dave, you'll go first again. Same question, but instead of what mental attribute, what physical attribute, and maybe it's a technique thing, like all good hurdlers will do this well, or maybe it's just a physical attribute that you've noticed through the years that most hurdlers are able to do X, Y, and Z. So what physical attribute makes for a good hurdler?
Well, selfishly, I always look for size and flexibility. My best guy and gal hurdlers have been really flexible. And my best gal hurdlers have been from 5'7" to 5'11". The best ones physically have been from about 5'10" to 6'4". So there is a physical attribute. You get the smaller ones who are really quick, who can be just as good, but I think they're more the exception than the rule. So I look at their physical frame, I look at their speed, and I look at their flexibility. If you can put them all together, I have a 6'2" guy who can, like Thomas Janicki, do stand and then just go into full splits. You just don't get those people very often, I don't know. I'm sure Ryan has a better way to put it than I do, but
yeah, I would say, jokingly, I'll say I'm opposite. Some of my best, our school record holder in the 300 hurdles was probably 5'4" on a good day. So, but I would say any hurdle coach, their dream is to have tall hurdlers. When I was in high school, I think I was 6'3" by the end. But height doesn't matter. To go with what Dave said, flexibility is key. Sometimes when I get eyes on athletes, I'm watching intervals, I'm watching, some of those other things we do. I look at stride length. I look at there's, again, it's like RoboCop, I guess, where I can kind of zoom in and figure it out. And I'm like, that kid needs to hurdle. But it's sometimes the most surprising kid that I didn't think might be the one ends up being the one. And, like, hey, come over and try it. And that's how I was. I think I mentioned in my podcast that Coach Erickson, we'll just say he convinced me to want to hurdle. And thankfully he did that. But I also want to say that the kid that has that go button, and I would say Thomas had that. And I think, Dave, you would agree, those races between Thomas and Mitch Wiesen were some of the most fun. Yeah. They were some of the most fun races to watch, because those kids would run to the end of the earth for 300 meters over hurdles, but sometimes it's that go factor that you just the kid has it, and you can give them the skills to hurdle and to do that. So those are kind of my things I look for. So
Well, and shout out to the a program that's not on this right now, but Tommy Murdoch is I coached his I coached some of his brothers, and that kid is so fun to watch race, and I missed that sort of, when Janicki and the Burlington guy were running. That was like, again, like you said, it was a showstopper for me, especially 300 hurdles. But man, Tommy right now is I mean, he's a showstopper to me. Like, I want to stop
100%. He's at that level when you're running sub 40.
Yeah, and it's physically he's kind of built like that, but man, mentality wise, that what you were just both you're describing, he is 100% that.
But I would put him in that category where he's kind of the unassuming superstar.
Yeah.
Where if you don't know who he is, and you show up to a meet going, all right, this kid, and all of a sudden he will burn the track down, and he will win, and he's got another year, so it'll be fun to watch him this year.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun to watch.
Yeah.
You guys are getting me excited, man. We've talked about sprints, and we're going through hurdle competitions. But
hey,
now,
we're under 30 days to track and field, baby.
I know, man. That's probably part of it too. I just had a Red Bull, so dude, I'm shaking here. But to really get the juices flowing, we're gonna talk relays for a little bit. And Sue, I'd like to start with you, and Jake's gonna be more of a observer on this in terms of I'll kind of take the lead here, since Jake, you do our relays, and then I've got some specific questions for Brad and for Kevin at the end that also have to do with relays. So Sue, we'll start with you. Let's talk about types of handoffs and why. I always think that this is an interesting talk. 4x4, we really don't need to go into it that much. I think everybody kind of does the same thing there. But Sue, can you kind of talk about what handoffs have been most successful for you in the 4x1, and then we'll get into the 4x2 right after that.
Okay. Well, in my first iteration as a track coach, like 1984 to 2000, we did handoffs differently than what we do now in this second iteration. We've gone for both the 4x1 and the 4x2 to more of a push punch handoff, where we used to do the knuckles to the sky, kind of less efficient. Turn your knuckles over and set it in. So we do same handoff strategy, not steps wise, obviously, but for both the 4x1 and 4x2. And we kind of go by the philosophy, we really need to perfect our handoffs. Burlington Edison doesn't always have the fastest athletes, but we strive to have the best handoffs in the relays to make up a little bit of differential in speed there.
Yeah, you guys do a really good job with your relays. That's why I'm so interested to kind of keep talking about this. Your outgoing runner, what are you telling them in terms of how they start? Are you guys dead heavy on being 2-point open, looking over your shoulder? Are you guys down in a 3-point stance? Do you leave it up to the kids? And then I guess a follow-up to that is, does the new exchange zone change any of that, or were there minor adjustments or no adjustments from what you used to do?
Yeah, so we did not change anything really with the new exchange zone, because some of the tracks still have it didn't change what we did for setting up. We use a mark system where we have a kind of a zone, so 2 pieces of tape. So our outgoing runner sets up, where their marks are. And as far as they get back to the acceleration arrow and leave it up to them. Very few of our kids use a 3-point stance. Some of them, we try to get some of them to try it and just kind of see if they like it. But the biggest thing is, you want your hips square to the track, and you look back over your shoulder, but your hips are square to the track, so you don't have to turn and go. So you're ready. When your incoming runner, hovers into that zone with their foot, you take off and you do not look back, and stay, in your side of the lane, the right side or the left side, depending on your handoff, and do not look back. And you have to trust. We've practiced. You have to trust that that incoming runner is going to get it to you, or they're going to call you off and say, stop or whatever. So that's what we tell, in a nutshell, the outgoing person.
Okay. Love it. And I've got some more follow-up questions for you too. Jake, before I get to you and your answers, I know I'm just kind of recalling back to when Kodiak presented from Mount Vernon. We had a brief, maybe 10-minute part in there where we talked about handoffs. And I know at Mount Vernon, and I can't see if you guys can see this or not, but outgoing runner will go out to the side with receiving hand, thumb down, and incoming runner will come in and, Sue, like you said, punch forward, almost like the torch up in a 4x4 handoff, obviously at a higher velocity. But I remember him saying that. And then as far as takeoffs and stuff like that go, he said pretty much exactly what you said, Sue. He likes them low and getting out, but very few kids can be accurate with their eyesight looking back to find that mark. And so he kind of leaves it up to them as they go out, if I'm remembering that conversation correct.
And we go outgoing runner, not out to the side, but we want it back behind with your fingertips pointing down, a flat surface for that baton to punch into.
Gotcha.
Flat vertical surface for it to punch into.
Gotcha.
Sue,
So there's a little
what
difference there with what Kodiak was saying, I think.
Yeah. Sue, what height do you teach on that? Because I've done the push pass where I've, essentially when I teach it, it's almost, straight out versus, because I know when it's happening in a meet, it's not going to be here, it's going to be back. And so I don't teach you to go back because I don't want them to be back behind their hips. So are you teaching straight back with the idea that you want it slightly, a slight angle on it, or
a forward lean and the arms really straight back with your fingertips down? So try to strive for a straight line instead of a broken, handoff. Straight line, punch right in, and some of that it depends on the heights too of the two, right? So sometimes you got a short person going to a taller person, you have to modify that a little bit, but in general, the straight back, straight line.
Okay, Jake, let's go to you at Woolley. What are you teaching in the 4x1 and the 4x2 as far as what types of handoffs?
So the 4x1, last year we shifted to the up sweep, and it was much because I was definitely much more on the other philosophy of the push, having the wide target, and I think for us, the advantages to me that the up sweep gave us in terms of timing, and then also again that and I used to do a blind for years. I did a blind exchange, so I had a marker out where the athlete started, and then we had a mark inside the exchange zone where the athlete's hand would go up, so nothing was said. And I had success with that.
So not blind, but nonverbal, right?
Nonverbal, yeah. Blind and nonverbal. Sorry, yeah. And so, there wasn't any action. That as soon as the athlete hit the mark, their hand went up, and then you spaced off of that. The up sweep, we've gone back to a command, which I've again was contrast of what I philosophically wanted, but I just saw the advantage of the up sweep in terms of not interrupting the running mechanics and allowing the runner still to, because one of the reasons I like that sort of upward motion and running into it is that the incoming runner didn't have to slow. They could run hip to hip. keep the baton essentially going as full speed as possible. And so for us, the upsweep will still allow that potential for the baton to be at full speed as you're going through. So there's correction that you can still make corrections as you're coming into the hip. If I've gone too fast into the hip, essentially I can run with the runner, and teaching those athletes to essentially try to chase down the outgoing runner, and the outgoing runner trying as hard as possible to not get caught. And so that philosophy of being at max speed as they're getting the baton was a great point. And so one of the things we had with that training was the marker that you use to kind of identify where you want the baton to get. So essentially, like with 10 meters left in the exchange zone is ideal. And that's when they're close to being at full speed. And so when we're coaching it and measuring it, it was a great indicator for us to be able to say, hey, we're not quite at that number, and so spacing wise, we need to go, further back, or we need to reduce the steps. It gave us a great measuring point. The disadvantage to that upsweep is where you get the baton. And that was probably the thing that was the hardest adjustment for me, because when it's coming underneath, depending on where they get it, they're getting it at the top, or essentially at the hands. Ideally, they're hand to hand, but if they get at the top, they've got to adjust. And we had to teach a technique of like essentially moving the baton while they're sprinting full speed, up back to moving the baton essentially back to the bottom of the hand. So, but I all of them work. I mean, the best case scenario is you have 4 really fast people, and it doesn't really matter. That would be the best thing.
Yeah.
But when you're especially in our 2A district, I mean, I'm hurting my head trying to calculate tenths of a second between exchanges to make sure that they're trying to get to that max speed when they're getting that baton. So we just felt the upsweep gave us the best opportunity with that, with the lowest risk. And again, not to say that any other philosophy is good, bad, or the other, but that definitely is one of those. So, and we typically start, I start the women back 15, and then adjust from there. And then I start the males back 18, and then adjust from there. And that's simplistic in terms of trying to figure it out. But we have a target point, 10 meters essentially at the end of the exchange zone, which is our key component. And then, we can, if they're getting too quick to that 10 meters, then we, reduce the number of steps. If they need more of a build up, they go from there. But I'm the same thing. I try to get the athlete as comfortable as possible on that takeoff. And we've had kids which is super frustrating, because I would love for it to just be one thing. They got opposite foot forward, lean back, they're exploding out, and you're teaching that technique. But some kids just get nervous and they get too short steps, and so they never get to full speed. Or we got kids like Carson who, 4 steps, he's at full speed. And I'm like, I can't coach that. You're at full velocity, you're at max velocity way too early. And I'm not going to argue with it, because you're still running super fast. So it's like, well, you're going against what I would normally do, which was allow a large buildup to get to that max velocity. And for him, he's a quick sprint and out. And so, you just kind of adjust to that.
Yeah. You talked about, and Sue, we saw something, this off season. There's going to be a point in time, no matter what type of handoff you use, where, you've got kids reaching, fumbling for it or whatever. And if they ever, can you guys see this? Okay. The baton. So if they ever get it at the top, you try to coach them on what to do. So like, against your chest, or hit it with the opposite hand, or God forbid, they're hitting it against their thigh. We saw this guy and he said, just keep it calm. And all you have to do is twist in your hand. So as you're running, if you twist, it grows and grows and grows and grows.
Oh,
And eventually
wow.
you get to the spot where you're back down at the bottom. And
Well,
when,
I thought it was going to be super complicated to teach, and then I gave it to one of our athletes that I was most worried about them learning it, because whenever you put any technique for them, they take a while.
Yeah.
And they literally were just like, "Oh, like this," and I was like, "Yep, that's basically it." So apparently, it isn't that complicated. I thought it was going to be super complicated, but and then we'll have them rep it and practice it, as they're going through handoffs, and ask them to take it when we do like handoff practice. Ask them to kind of be intentional on like when we're practicing the handoff. Take it at a different spot just so you have to work it. Ideally, though, it's hand to hand, and so when they get it in, it's the same thing with that push. You're wanting that contact to kind of be at that specific point. But
I'm using that though. That's good. Thanks.
well, now I regret showing it to anybody. So that's okay. So Sue, this one's going to be a little quicker for you and Jake, and then I want the head coaches to kind of weigh in here. But Sue, when are you guys practicing relay handoffs? And what does that look like for you guys? Are you doing certain relays on certain days? Does it depend? How are you guys involving relays in your practices?
Well, it depends. Always the day before a meet. Ideally, we can get in twice a week. Looks the 4x1s we'll do in runner 1 to 2 and 3 to 4, on the coming out of the curve, all at the same time. So we'll have all the boys and girls there together, and then we'll shift down to into the curve and runner 2 to 3. And then I'll usually, after we've finished that, kick them loose and do the 4x2s in that same spot down there. I feel like we can never get enough practice on the relays. It's always a scramble the day before a meet, but as the season progresses, then we kind of get that routine down a little bit better. We always start with just basics, back to basics, standing handoffs. We start our practice with that, jogging handoffs, and then we go to the zones and set up. And I figure we've got 3 to maybe 5 attempts to, at a realistic speed before the kids are going to be too tired, or you're going to run them into the ground, to get a perfect handoff. So, make our adjustments that we need for that meet or whatever. If we have a new person on the relay, sometimes that it looks a little bit different. But that's generally what we get to do. So like I said, we never get enough time for practice for relay handoffs. We try to have all the kids at the start of the season, all the sprinters, we do part of our integrate it into our workouts and have them all kind of learn the basics, so that when we need to pull them into duty, into a relay, they at least have a basic knowledge of what they're doing. When they're practicing for the actual meet.
Okay, and Jake, before I get to you, Sue, this is a yes or no question. Do you practice relay handoffs at the site of the meet before the first event goes off?
No, we do a walk around and we make sure everybody's clear on the zones. I physically walk with them and we make sure everybody's clear on that. But we do not do handoffs in those zones at the meet site.
Okay, and then Jake, same question for you as far as practice and how you're incorporating relay handoffs in practice.
Yeah, we typically get 2, maybe 3 days a week. Kind of what Sue said. There's a limited amount of like reps you can get. My plan this year is kind of shifted because I am kind of breaking it down into like handoff practice, which to me you can do a ton of reps. And so we do the standing to start out with. That's the initial warm up. And then I do a thing called matching speed, and this is for 4x1, where essentially the incoming runner kind of comes in at a decent pace with good form. And then all I want the outgoing runner to do is to match it at a certain point, and then just work the upswing, and then kind of, work on that. There's no point that they need to pass or whatever. So that'll be one day a week. And then the other day is going to be, it's 3 attempts. They're all filmed. I don't do any of the handoffs that I'm trying to get timing and spacing on without filming. Now I'm fortunate. Sometimes I'll do the, 3-4 runner and the 1-2 runner, and we'll have a manager film the one section, and then I'll be on the other. But I film it because I cannot get any good coaching points without filming it. Because anything I see is not going to be relative. So being able to break it down on film when they do it is great. And so I'll have one group go, I'll film it. I'll have them come over and stand by me. I'll do the next group, film it. And then, while we're resting, I'll look at it, make some comments and say, hey, you got 2 more attempts, essentially, at that point in time. Usually I put the manager or the other person on the group that's a little bit more successful, just because they're more consistent and I'm not as worried about it. And I'll spend time with the one that probably needs a little bit more energy. But, that's kind of like Tuesday, Thursday would be that in terms of what that looks like. And then 4x2 is usually pre-meet. We've got a different strategy with our 4x2 with the flyby. And so hitting that rep's a little different. It's not quite like the 4x1 where you want to necessarily be at full speed. So it's just kind of teaching that technique and running some rests with that. So you can usually do that on a pre-meet day, do a couple of rounds of that, and then that's kind of how we organize it. Again, ideally, I especially with when I was at LaConner, it was a little different because we maximized 4 kids. We expected those 4 kids to hopefully have an opportunity to go to state in those 4 events. At our level at 2A with our district, I mean, our relays are probably driving kids going to state. So there's more of an emphasis on that being the focus to push toward postseason. So that's a little different in terms of, the weight of that. So like toward the end of the season, we'll probably spend a little bit more time on the relay than we would at the beginning. But yeah, I mean, those 2 days in the beginning of the season, and Sue, like you said, like getting as many people getting reps, like that's the constant challenge of just making sure you get kids, because you have no idea, girls especially, 9th graders coming in. I mean, they could be fast as heck, and you never calculated them being in your relay team, and then you're like, oh man, I need them in my relay team. With guys, I mean, sometimes it's like, hey, I haven't run track for 2 years, but I'm coming out my junior year, and hey, now you're on a relay team. So I'm like, oh well, you got to learn track and you got to learn relay. So it's kind of a flip bag on that one. So just trying to get as many reps as possible.
I want to say that video feedback that you mentioned is so powerful for those kids to see themselves and what they think happened and what actually happened, and they can correct it. So I mean, many of them, some of them struggle with that anyway, but just correct it so much quicker when they see it and get that kind of visual, and they're like, okay, God, I didn't know I was doing that, I got this now, and they'll go and they'll fix it right away once they see it.
Well, and it's the same thing with jumps. It's do it full speed, do it maximum effort. Don't hesitate. Don't think about it. Let us adjust off of that. Same thing with hurdles, all those technical events. Like, because if you slow down or you tell me that you didn't want to, like you were thinking about, I'm like, don't do it. Just if you blow past the outgoing runner at full speed, that gives me way more information than it does if you run in and start to slow down and try to compensate for their speed. I'm like, that doesn't give me anything. I'm like, go full force. If that's what happens, then that tells me coaching point, teaching point, I got it figured out. But if you're coming in there going, well, I thought they were going too slow, so I slowed down. And I'm like, yep, you know what? You just started thinking, and now I have nothing to go with, and that rep doesn't really do me. So, yeah.
Well, to wrap up the relay talk here, I kind of wanted to get Kevin and Brad's thought on this. So maybe I'll just ask you guys two questions. Brad, you can go first. I want to know how you guys figure out who's going to end up on the relays. Are there times where you're talking with your staff and it's like, well, yeah, we can add her to the 4x4, but that's also going to take her away from her individual event? Or do you guys kind of sub girls in and guys into your 4x1 and get to a certain point where you're like, no, we gotta like keep this thing together. These are our four. We're going with them come hell or high water. Can you just kind of talk to me real quick about how you're choosing your teams?
Absolutely. Specifically with the 4x4 anyways, I will mix and match all season long to see what kind of combinations I can come up with, how they work with one another. Usually it's a rotation of probably about 6 girls, maybe 7 if I'm lucky. The order that they run in usually doesn't change as much. I like to pick that based on kind of what their personality traits might be. Your diehard, burn to the earth kind of girls obviously can go last, so on and so on. Usually we'll settle on or the top 4 that looks like they're going to make it into the season, be it a championship or the season. Then I won't run them together for sure until we get to sub districts. But yeah, so it's basically kind of identifying speed first, who can run a 400, and their personality traits, and then for the shorter relays, you got to look at how fast the kids you're working with are and how well they work with one another as far as spending time wanting to get the handoffs good in those faster relays. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And Kevin, for you, I want to talk about, and Sue and Ryan, you guys can jump in on this too. I want to know your guys' philosophy on who you put in what order. So, 4x1, I think most of us are like-minded there, where you've got your best starter first and either your fastest runner second or fourth, depending on how competitive they are. And then usually your slowest one is third. And I might be wrong on how you guys deal with it, but that tends to kind of normally be the case. But 4x2 and 4x4, there's a lot of different philosophies. So Kevin, can you kind of talk about, are you guys slow to fast? Are you fast to slow? Are you something totally different than that with your 4x2 and your 4x4?
Our 4x2, yeah, a lot of it 4x2 and 4x4, we've had a lot of years where we've actually had the same team run both.
In the same order?
Not always.
Not always in the
Gotcha.
same order.
Same 4 folks though.
Yes, and that sometimes that's just because of how many kids you actually have there. If you have the luxury of having a very, very deep team, obviously you don't need to do that. But you can do it with the 4x2, 4x4, because they're also opposite ends of the meet, so you're not worried about that as an issue. I would say most of the time you've got the fastest kid on the anchor, but not always. And I know that like my philosophy is always like 4x4 wise, we had a team that we actually broke the state record, and unfortunately it got broke by like 2 years later. It got broke by 0.2, I think, and that's still so our time's the second fastest ever run, yet it got broke, which still bugs me. Stupid Afreda. But we that team, we had a kid who was a pure sprinter. He was second in the state in the 200. And we also had a kid that he ran cross country. He was a distance background that kind of became a really fast 400 runner, and he really did not have top end speed. He was definitely not a 100 or 200 guy, and he really wasn't an 800 guy. He was a 400 guy that just had a gear in that 400. And we put him on anchor, and a lot of it was because he had the distance background, that he just had that ability. You know, we knew he wasn't going to die. We knew that he would be able to hold it. So we kept him on anchor. I always like to have if you have an 800 runner that can step down, I like having them second, because I like they're obviously, unless they're, an unbelievable, top sprinter that can be your anchor as well, but they can cut in. They know the cut in. They cut in an 800 race, and they also know how to run in traffic, because the 800 is always a traffic race. And you always want, we've had a differing philosophy every once in a while I always feel it is your kids who maybe are not the strongest runner. They are, especially if they're like your number two, you have a much better chance if they can be in the race. So even if you have to sacrifice a little bit of end speed to have a runner that's going to keep you in the race or even in the front, that second runner, there's such a mentality of not letting the team down. Sometimes they can kind of overshoot what they're capable of because they're in the race. If you get someone that goes out there and runs and is in seventh, and everybody's got to try to bring them back, that's harder to do. And so, so anyway, those are some philosophies we've used. I mean, and it depends on, it's so much dependent on your personnel. How old are they? I mean, is it a senior that that is going to give you everything? Are they a freshman that, you don't really know how they're going to deal with the real pressure of running, in a district final to try to get to state? So that, the 4x1, absolutely. I think we've rarely, I don't know, Sue and Ryan, you can probably tell me if I'm wrong on this. I don't know if I almost feel like we've always put our fastest on anchor. I don't think we've very often ever done the second leg with them.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For 4x4, yeah.
For 4x1.
4x1.
4x1. Yeah. 4x1.
One other little tidbit just to add on to what Kevin was saying, there's so many different strategies, and it kind of just depends on the group that you're working with. It's also kind of important to consider, like, what do those first two legs look like in the 4x4? If you've got maybe two really fast kids and two really slower kids, sometimes I think it's warranted to put those two faster kids on your first two legs, because those exchanges, instead of happening in lane 1 and 2, you're avoiding maybe having to go from lane 1 to hand off out in lane 7 and then dive back into lane 1, and you can avoid that with having your faster kids in those first two.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
This awesome, good stuff. We're pushing up against time, and so we've been ending these roundtables with a word of advice to the new sprint coach or the new throws coach or whatever the topic of the roundtable is. So I'm going to do this a quick shout out to a local listener. Mason Elms is now the head sprint and jumps coach for the Brewster Bears. So we're going to give Coach Elms some advice. So Dave, I'll start with you, and then I'm going to go all the way around the round table. What is one piece of advice you would tell a first year sprint coach like Mason?
Whoa. Okay. Don't ever think you're a really good coach. You should always try to be better. The minute you think you're a really good coach, you're not anymore.
Awesome. Ryan, you're up.
Oh gosh. As a new coach, soak it in, learn from those around you, whether it's on your staff or coaches from your past. Thankfully, my coaches from the past are sitting on this podcast mostly. But and less is more, just really focus on the fundamentals and learn as you go.
Good. Brad?
First of all, hey, Mason, I guess I would just be patient. There's like Davidson, there's always more to learn. Trust what you do know, get to know the kids you're working with, and be patient that first year.
Good. Sue?
Kind of the same flavor as everyone else. Just be open to learning, keep learning, ask questions, ask your mentors or ask your fellow coaches. Don't be afraid to do that because we're all in this together, and we enjoy talking about track and keep an open mind.
Awesome. Jake?
I echo the less is more. Less emphasis on the training and more emphasis on building a relationship with kids, because I think that's the strongest point in terms of what you're doing. You can harm an athlete more than you can hurt them in the physical sense, but you can definitely build them up 100% with those relationships, and it's way more valuable. So
Perfect. And Kevin?
You never know where you're going to find those diamonds in the rough. It's the beauty of track and field is that you never know. It literally is Forrest Gump. You never know what you're going to get. And the kid that shows up, Ryan and Sue now, we've had some kids show up and you look at them as freshmen and you think, I don't know where that kid's going to fit. And by the time they're a senior, they are a multi-time state runner, and they're just it's such a joy to discover new kids all the time and see them find their strengths. So keep an open mind to what kids can become.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for that. This has been a great one. I love talking, and if it was up to me, this could be a 3-hour podcast. Just because I could talk about the sprints and all things sprints for a long time. But thank you to the head coaches for popping on. Ryan and Sue, thank you guys very much for coming on and talking hurdles and relays with us. We appreciate it. And before we end this thing, Dave, you have been such a huge part of our program. I can't thank you enough. And I don't know what our program would look like here without you. We score a lot of points in the hurdles.
You have a taller guy than me.
Well, all your contributions and everything, and I know you want us to end this thing, but I'm really glad you're part of our program, and appreciate you jumping on today.
Well, thank you. Thank all of you.
Yeah, our pleasure. Thank you guys.
Thanks, guys.